frankly, even though he's been really good in his career, I don't think he's ever fully lived up to his potential. We've seen moments, and it's whether does he put it all together in Philly, and I think that is a lot of pressure.
Welcome back in, everybody. A Tuesday, May 14th edition of Birds 365, moving right along in the offseason, less than 1 week away from OTAs. We are joined now on Birds 365 by Cayden Steele of NJ.com. Cayden, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks, guys, for having me. Great to join.
Good to see you, Cayden. So we haven't talked to you since the draft. I guess we'll start there. Certainly looks good on paper. Where are you in the fact of optimism versus pessimism with Howie Roseman's draft?
Yeah, like you said, John, I mean, it's hard to grade right now because we don't know what's going to happen in the future with injuries and such. But, on paper, you never expected to play out the way it did, to be able to get Quinny Mitchell and Cooper DeJean with your top two picks, especially get Cooper DeJean at 40. Both players were considered top 25-ish prospects. I mean, Mitchell, top 15 prospect in this class, and be able to get both to help rebuild your secondary, I thought was, as good as it could have played out. And then for the rest of the draft, I mean, I thought they did a good job for the most part for getting value. I think Jalen Hunt is a really interesting draft pick. We don't know necessarily how you'll translate, how he'll translate from Houston Christian, but the athleticism profile, at the end of the third round, I thought it was worth a swing, honestly. That's one where I think that maybe got the most amount of criticism because, I mean, what is Houston Christian, right? Like, people don't really necessarily know. But, I mean, every pick, in the third, fourth, especially in the late fourth, fifth, sixth round, it's a swing. You're just taking shots, and why not take a shot on that athleticism profile? He doesn't need to play right away. And then, the rest of the draft, you're able to add to this offense, which I thought was interesting. You're able to get Will Shipley, who could be your, check down back. You're out, and it seems like they're going to prioritize, throwing the ball more to the running backs. You add Saquon in free agency, you add Will Shipley in the draft, who's more of a pass catching type of back. You add Anaya Smith, who's a versatile playmaker, and he could do a lot of different things, including from the backfield as well as a wide receiver. So I thought it was interesting to see what maybe imprints that Kellen Moore might have. And then obviously Jeremiah Trotter Jr. was the fan favorite, and it'll be interesting because heard Xander talking about it before the break. This linebacker group is not very good, and I'm not saying he's going to win a starting job, but who knows? Like, he might have the opportunity to. So I thought they had a good draft, but we'll look back in 2 or 3 years and see if it actually pans out.
Yeah, a lot of love for the fifth-round picks this year. As you pointed out, Cayden, though, you're swinging in the fifth round. We don't know what these guys are going to be, but I mean,
there is tremendous. All three of them. There are a lot of people think Anaya Smith is going to be the slot receiver. Trott's going to be a starting linebacker, and even Trevor Keegan's going to push to be the starting right guard. Boy, that is optimism right there. I mean, these are fifth-round picks. Now, there's a lot of dumb NFL teams, but there's a lot of teams passing over those guys until you get to the fifth round. There's flaws there. Are people too excited with those fifth-round picks?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. Most fifth, sixth-round picks, don't last more than 2 or 3 years in the league. You occasionally get your Puka Nakuas of the world and Kyron Williams, but like, that's a dime in a dozen. So yeah, probably pump the brakes a little bit on Jeremiah Trotter Jr. being a 5-time All-Pro and Anaya Smith being an elite slot wide receiver. I mean, it would be great if these guys can become really good depth pieces for you and good special teams player, and perhaps in 2 years one of the three might be a starter for you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That's more realistic. Yeah. I get it though. I mean, at this time of the year, for the NFL job, it's an exciting time, especially if you're a fan, and it gives you new hope. But I mean, it's tough to adjust to the NFL, especially if you're a day 3 pick. So it's definitely smarter to pump the brakes, but you never know. There is day 3 draft picks you do tear out. So
yeah, let's go to the top of the draft. You talked about Quinyon and Cooper DeJean. I mean, at one point before the draft, we were saying, okay, if we're picking at 21 or 22 and one of the two is there's a decision to make. We ended up with both of them in the top 40. What I'll ask you is, do we have enough? Has Howie done enough personnel-wise on the defensive side of the football to improve the defense Does Vic Fangio have the guys he needs, or are we still missing a lot of talent on that side of the ball?
I think it's a start. It's a good step, especially with Eugene and Mitchell in the secondary. And there's going to be an adjustment period. So I'm not going to – maybe that's another – maybe people are overreacting. I don't think the secondary is going to come out next year and all of a sudden be all pro, all team. Like, I think there's still going to be – it's tough to play defensive back as a rookie. So, like, as good as Quinn and Mitchell and Cooper DeJean are, they might still struggle, a little bit next year. And you add that with, the way that James Bradbury struggled last year and – Slay getting older, and like I know they added back, CJ Gardner-Johnson, but they're also going to have, Cindy Brown might not miss the beginning of the year. The secondary might still struggle, but I think it's a step in the right direction for the future. You have some young players that you could be excited about, and it seems like from that press conference, Vic Fangio talked about, he wants this to be his last job, so he might be here for 2, 3, 4 years. So I think it was the right step. And then overall, from a defensive perspective, with those additions, I do think they're still better than they were last year, but I'm not feeling great about the linebacker group. I mean, I still think Bryce Huff is a question mark of whether he could play a full-time role and replace the production that Hassan Reddick had. And it's no guarantee that this defensive unit's going to be any better. But, I mean, they've certainly have been trying in free agency in the draft, so we'll see how it plays out. But right now, I would say, there's reason to feel optimism, but there's no, guarantee that the results will be too much better. Obviously, Vic is a really good defensive coordinator. He's been throughout his career. So you might be able to get more out of these guys than Matt Patricia and Sean Desai did. So I think more likely they're kind of in the middle of the pack next year instead of, bottom 3 defense. So, like, I think it's more likely they're like 18th or 17th next year.
Yeah, I think that's been my prediction already, Cayden. They will be better on defense because Vic is here, his presence. He's not a magic fix to everything, but they were so bad last year. That's part of it. They almost have to get better, and it's going to be taught better. It's not the Xerox copy. It's the original running the defense. I think all of that factors in to it being better. Now, I don't think it's going to be great because the talent's not there yet, but middle of the road, and they could win a lot of games with their offense if they can just get middle of the road defensively. And so not only Vic, Kellen Moore, your first impressions with those guys. We finally got to talk to them after they got hired 18 months ago, it seems, but we finally got to talk to them. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're both, seem, I thought Vic was really good and just the way he outlined, his plan. And the one thing he talked about versatility, and that's the thing I'm most excited to see about this defense going forward. You mentioned getting the guy and the way that Vic has used, his defense. He asks a lot of his guys, and
he does.
I think that's going to be the fun thing to watch is to see how these players, adapt to these certain roles and where he uses them. So I thought he was great. And, I think, Vic, has a certain, reputation around the league for maybe being, grumpy or something along those lines. I mean, people have talked about it. You had some issues, obviously, in Miami, but, just for
old school. He's an old school guy.
School guy, definitely. But from him just talking to us and the media, I mean, he seems like a fun guy to, he
is.
He's definitely got a personality that, is enjoyable.
And he tells the truth, which I enjoy.
Yes.
Yeah, and he doesn't give a what. I think that's the most impressive thing about him is that, like Sean Desai, I think, like back in training camp, I remember because I was one of them last year at Cayden. I was like, you remember early he was throwing James Bradbury in the slot. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And Vic kind of explained it because Sean's a direct disciple of Vic Fangio, and Vic said flat out, I like to throw a lot at them early and see what they can sort of ingest and then whittle it down from there, essentially. Paraphrasing, obviously. But he's got the cachet to do it. Like, nobody's going to second guess Vic Fangio. If he wants to throw James Bradbury in the slot, everybody's going to go, hey, good idea, Vic.
Yeah.
Where if Sean Desai does it without the reputation, without the experience, everybody goes, what are you doing? I think that alone tells you kind of the difference. And I think he's also smart. So if he realizes somebody can't handle something, he's not going to ask him to do it. I think the Eagles got a lot better at defensive coordinator.
Yeah, and I think you could say the same about offensive coordinator. I get Kellen Moore didn't have the best season with the Chargers last year, but yeah, look, the offensive line was not very good. They lost Mike Williams at the beginning of the season, but when he was in Dallas, uh, it just seems to me when he got fired, he was kind of the scapegoat for Mike McCarthy.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
a
I agree with
little,
that, yeah.
a little, especially the way that the last one of those I think it was the last press conference he talked to the team when they fired Kellen Moore. It just, I think he's a really smart offensive mind, but the question is how much control will he have? We still don't know for sure how much influence Sirianni will have versus Kellen Moore, and I'm curious just to see how his ideas are adapted. But he's a smart guy, and I think he'll bring different stuff to the offense. I know a lot of Eagles fans were complaining about motion and not using enough of that to kind of create mismatches. I do think if Kellen, gets his hands on the offense and has a little more control than Nick, or at least Nick, kind of listens to his ideas, he will have that. It will be something that's incorporated. He'll do different things. That they're going to pass the ball to the running back. So, and even the draft picks, so like I said earlier, I think they indicate that. So it'll be fun to watch. He's a smart guy. We'll see if he can use all these pieces. This offense on paper has a chance to be better than last year. And it's nothing against DeAndre Swift, but Saquon Barkley is a different type of running back. He's more talented. He brings different things. I get Swift was productive, but then you also get A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, and you hope, Kellen Moore can even bring more out of them. You hope you get a healthy Dallas Goedert for the first time, for an entire season in a long time. But he has so many pieces to work with. This offense, Johnny, like you mentioned, it could be a top 3, 4, 5 offense in the league next year. And Kellen Moore has all the pieces. So I'm curious how it happens. And definitely think he has the mind and the right ideas to, make it come to fruition. So,
yeah, I want to kind of go ahead, Xander.
No, go ahead, Johnny Mike. You're good.
I want to sort of batten down on the motion aspect of it because a lot of people had a problem with Nick Sirianni. I kind of look at it from like Nick, bottom of the league, they barely used it, and it all harkened back to his time with Phillip Rivers, who didn't like motion and was smart enough and savvy enough to play in 100 years to figure out things formationally. So he liked just, hey, let me figure it out. Let me go to the line of scrimmage. I can figure it out. And I think Nick loves Phillip Rivers, for those who don't know. And I think he got caught up into that and saying, hey, when the quarterback changes, you got to change. And maybe Jalen needs a little bit more outliers to see some motion, to see what's going on, what the defense is in. So I think that's a problem from Nick's perspective. But then I asked Kellen the motion question, and Kellen went the opposite direction. It was like, well, my dad loved it. I grew up around it. I used a lot of it myself at Boise State. And I'm thinking, because I'm a weirdo, Cayden, I'm thinking, well, this is the same thing, just the opposite direction. He just likes it. And maybe Jalen Hurts, I don't know. Maybe he doesn't like it. So I think it's like if we say one thing, we should also bring up the possibility of the other.
Yeah, that is fair. And there is a balance. I don't think, if you're Kellen Moore, you come in and all of a sudden you're running motion every single play. I mean, some teams, they run a lot of motion out of their offense, like the Rams and the 49ers. And necessarily the Eagles don't need to do that. They just need to incorporate it a little bit. But it is curious to see if there is if it goes the polar opposite direction with Kellen Moore, like you said, John, the fact that he likes it a lot. Wonder if this offense completely changes. And it is interesting. I think you make a fair point of, just for, Jalen Hurts' sake and the offense's sake, it's just good to have that because, I mean, at the end of the day, motion creates mismatches. It creates easier throws. And I think that's the one thing for me last year, just watching this offense, everything just seemed so difficult. There was nothing that was created that was just easy for Jalen. Everything was vertical down the field, and there just wasn't a ton of just easy stuff. And I think, adding that element to your offense, if it's just, once in a while, just to throw off a defense will help. But it's a good point, John. It seemed like Sirianni didn't believe that motion was necessary, but the rest of the league, seemed like it was. And then Kellen, it seems like something that he'll bring in and try to add to the offense. But curious how much he does it and how much it, helps Hurts, or maybe Hurts, doesn't like him. I guess perhaps that is a chance that maybe he isn't comfortable. We don't know a lot of these things
Yeah.
and how these players, like certain things. So that is definitely I kind of agree with you on that one.
Yeah, I'd love to see them make some throws easier for Jalen Hurts. Let's talk Jalen Hurts. Me and Johnny Mack have talked about the defense and the draft picks. I think the number one person that this season comes down on is Jalen Hurts. If he gets back to 2022 form, if he plays like an MVP candidate, I think this team legitimately has Super Bowl potential. But if he doesn't, I think they're going to – and it's going to be another disappointing season like it was last year. What does Jalen Hurts have to do to you to get the most out of this team and to get the most out of this high-powered offense?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to see, and look, I think Jalen Hurts has been, pretty good, throughout his career so far. Obviously, we don't know, what level is he though? That's it's a fair point. Is he 2022? Is he last year? The first half of the season. I don't think he's, the second half of the season. Jalen Hurts, that entire team struggled and played terrible and collapsed. Like obviously, you would have liked to see him play better, even though the circumstances around him were kind of it was a mess, the entire organization. You would like to see a guy who is an MVP candidate play better, but I don't think we'll see that version. But I think I'm more debating, is he, first half of last year, or is he 2022, 2021? Is he more average, like top 12, top 15, or is he top 5? Like, and I really don't know that yet. But the first thing I want to go back and see is just the decision making. Last year at the end of the year, that was the part I was most concerned about, how things were breaking down. Him taking a safety in that playoff game against the Buccaneers, stuff like that. Just, I know it might have been just, maybe he got in his head at the end of the year. The entire team was, kind of falling apart. But I just want to see the decision making return to, to be really good, like it was the year before. And then, overall, I mean, I do want to see him. I'm glad for the steps that he's taken as a pocket passer. I think he's a really good pocket passer. But I wanted to see the explosive, ability in Jalen Hurts to return. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what makes him great. Yeah, he is a really good pocket passer, but he could beat you with his legs on a consistent basis, and that's a threat that not a lot of teams have. You see it in Baltimore with Lamar Jackson. You see why Washington took Jaden Daniels probably over Drake May, because he adds the element. It's a nightmare for defensive coordinators to game plan. They struggled with it in 2022 with Jalen Hurts, but with the injury last year, with the knee that was reported, and he just never looked explosive. And like, we won't see that with our own eyes until about training camp or maybe in the regular season. But you got to hope that returns. And then as a passer, you hope he continues to develop and that he continues to get better, because he's not perfect. He misses some throws. He misses some reads still. And I think there's still a long way for him to go to be that consistent MVP level, but the talent is there. We've seen it in 2022 with Shane Steichen. You just have to hope that him and Kellen Moore mesh on that same page, because obviously the skill set's there, and you just have to hope that kind of they see eye to eye with each other. We don't know what was happening, inside that building necessarily, but it definitely didn't seem like there was a lot of cohesion between him, Nick, and Brian Johnson. Obviously, Brian Johnson, is gone, but I just want to see Jalen just overall just play smart football, and just you hope that you can see some of that playmaking ability that you saw in 22, some of the off-script stuff, some of the athletic plays, and him also just develop in the pocket still. Because, Sandy, you make a point. If he is an MVP candidate with the offensive weapons that they have, that means they're probably making a deep playoff run. Even if he's not an MVP candidate, if he's just top 7, top 8, if he could just be, I mean, Eagles fans might not like me saying that. Even if he could just be Dak, if he could just be Dak level, like I think this team could be a Super Bowl contender. So, and Dak was an MVP candidate last year. So,
yeah, I agree. Just a quick follow up: how much stock do you put in, or how negative is it that Jason Kelce's going? We hear a lot of reports that Jason Kelce was doing all the blitz pickups. That's something I'm going to be watching, because I think it matters more than people are talking about this summer. There's a lot of talk about a lot of things, and Jalen Hurts isn't involved. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, I think it's a thing people might like to skip over, because you go back 2 years, they drafted Cam Jurgens, and he looked really good in preseason in 2022, and I was like, oh wow. So people think like he'll step in, it'll just be a natural transition, and the athleticism with Cam Jurgens definitely pops. But you mentioned just the IQ part of it. People have talked about Jason for years, where he's the heartbeat of that entire offense, and I think they'll miss that part. I mean, Cam might be able to make some of those athletic plays, but just the small integral things, that's what you would have to worry about. And then also for Cam, and he struggled at guard at times last year, and it's not his most natural position. But I mean, it's no guarantee that he's going to step in and the offense is going to function the same way, and that is a concern. Also, just I think the thing people forget the most is just the leadership aspect. I mean, Kelce was a voice in that locker room for years, and we saw how things collapsed, at the end of last year. And I know every year is a new year, but things are kind of a little, murky right now. And I wonder, who's going to be that voice to step up without Kelce? And I think that is an important, thing to watch out for. Who's that offensive leader now? Is it AJ? And it seems like he's going to continue to grow and mature. Is it going to be Jalen? And I think that's the part that intrigues me the most. Who's that voice in that offensive huddle going forward?
Yeah, and with Cam, I think my biggest question, I think Cam's going to be fine, but reality is he missed 5 games last year, or it might have been 6, with 2 different injuries. Jason Kelce played every week for years and years, so durability is going to be a question mark as well. You mentioned explosive plays, and I'm going to throw another E word at you. Expectations with that offense. We all think it's got a potential. You mentioned it could be a top 5 offense. It should be a top. I'll go far as it should be a top 5 offense. But that's a lot of expectations.
Yeah.
And for Kellen Moore coming in, you mentioned Saquon a little bit. You got to get him involved. AJ's got to be involved. Devontae's got to be involved. Dallas Goedert's got to be involved. You got to keep everybody happy. It's a nice problem to have, as they say, but when you say that term, nice problem, the word problem is in it. It can be a problem to keep everybody happy. You're concerned about the expectations overwhelming, because I think it overwhelmed them last year. They were miserable. The most miserable 10-1 team was the quote in history.
Yeah.
Because they weren't getting style points.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the expectations on paper, I get it, but there is a world where this, it's not as good, as people think it might be. You mentioned even Cam Jurgens, but Tyler Steen, there's a chance that interior of the offensive line, we've seen before in this league throughout history, when there isn't good guard and center play in the middle, that interior defensive line can disrupt games. So that's, there is question marks there. And then you mentioned it's at the end of the day, as smart as Kellen Moore is and as much success as he's had, this is his first year implementing, his ideas into this offense. We've seen it for 3 years now, a new version, a new look on offense. I mean, last year was kind of similar. They just didn't adjust as much, but 3 new offensive coordinators and Steichen, Brian Johnson, not Kellen Moore. That's not a lot of continuity. As much as we want to be excited about Kellen, there's a chance that it does take maybe half a season if they're really overhauling things for this thing to get going. So I could see it in that perspective from them not finishing too high. And then there's a lot of mouths to feed. You gotta feed AJ, you gotta feed Devontae. They both just got paid, so maybe that helps a little bit. They got a little money in the bank. You're not
a little money.
Got a lot of money now in the bank, so you don't have to worry about that. And maybe if they're that will help a little bit, and they're winning a lot more games, it won't be as much of a thing to worry about. And at the end of the day, you also mentioned Dallas Goedert. If there's one player I think they're not as worried about getting the ball to at this point, I mean, I think it's Dallas. I think they would love to incorporate him. I think him be able to make plays in the middle of the field brings a different element. But I think this offense is going to run through AJ and Devontae and Saquon. I wouldn't be surprised if Saquon, if Kellen Moore kind of comes in and has done what he's done in the past, I won't be surprised if Saquon has 50-plus catches next year. So that's a lot of people to throw the ball to. Curious to see how much, they throw the ball this year. I think they'll throw it a decent bit, and how many, run the ball chance will start about, week 10 this year, because I think Kellen I think he wants to be high fly.
He definitely wants to be high fly. 11 personnel, he's throwing it all over the place. That's my prediction. With Kellen Moore, unfortunately, for some Eagles fans. Not the smart ones. That's how you win in the modern NFL. And you run to close it out. You pass to get the lead, you run to close it out.
Cayden, let me ask you, who do you think has the most pressure on going into on the offensive side of the ball this year? I mean, they have all this talent. They signed Saquon Barkley. They really had an underwhelming performance at the end of last season. Is it Nick? Is it Kellen? Is it Jalen? Where's the pressure lie?
Just to be different, like, because we've already talked about Jalen. Overall, it's probably Jalen, but just from a different perspective, there is some pressure on Saquon to come in here. The reason you don't usually see Howie, go out and sign running backs for that type of money, and I think in their minds, he's going to come in, he's going to elevate the offense like Swift couldn't, like Miles Sanders couldn't, and from what we saw last of Saquon in New York, and I get it, the offensive line was horrendous. The team's not good. Daniel Jones is not good. I still believe Saquon is a supremely talented running back, but there's no guarantee that he comes in here and he's way more productive than DeAndre Swift was. And if that's the idea that he's going to be the person that they looked at it and they're like, it's more than just play calling. We need that missing piece to kind of push us back up into that top 3 to 5 territory. There will be, some pressure on Saquon to be the player that, frankly, even though he's been really good in his career, I don't think he's ever fully lived up to his potential. We've seen moments, and it's whether does he put it all together in Philly. And I think that is a lot of pressure for him to, even though the contract in reality isn't too terrible, but like he's got to be a top, 5 to 6 back to make it seem worth it to me.
I think the Eagles better press the pause button on the hype machine there, because you got Howie calling them special. You got Kellen Moore calling him impactful. I mean, just see how it works out. Yeah, I think they're putting, and their whole sentiment of this guy's different. This guy's, essentially the best thing, closest thing to Christian McCaffrey. They're putting a lot of pressure on that guy. A lot of pressure. To live up to that. So I agree with you there. I've been talking about that for a while. At Cayden _Steele 19. Make sure you follow Cayden on X. You can read him at nj.com. Our buddies Bob Brookover, big Saquon Barkley fan. He's contributing to the hype as well. Cayden.
Yeah, he is.
Chris Franklin, also good friend of the show. Good to see you, Cayden. And I guess we'll end it on one defensive question. Who was the slot corner in Cayden Steele's mind?
God, there's so many different options, which is different than last year, right? With all the injuries happened, you were kind of throwing Eli Ricks in the slot, and I don't think they'll have that problem this year. I don't even know if Eli Ricks will make the roster with how much depth that they've added at corner this year.
Yeah.
So that speaks to the amount of options, and that is the one area. Whether you want to make an argument whether the top end talent's going to show out this year or not, we'll see. But the depth is certainly better. And I mean, you brought back Avonte Maddox, but I'm not really confident. We saw him. It's just so many injuries in the past few years. He came back and played safety in that playoff game, and he didn't look that great. You got him back on the veteran minimum. So I'm not going to pick Avonte, even though he's been that guy, since 2018. I know they've said this. They've started, to talk about how they're going to, put Cooper outside cornerback at first. But I think maybe it's not week 1, but I think by week 3, 4, 5, Cooper, I think they're going to play him on the outside a little bit, move him around, maybe even at safety. But I think eventually he settles into that nickel quarterback role about, week 5, week 6, and he becomes that guy there that can play nickel. And then he can also move over to safety, and you have then maybe you can move Avonte in there as your backup slot or whoever else you want to throw out there. But, the idea that, for me right now, I think Slay and I know people are talking about Bradbury still being here, but there's no way in my mind that Quinn and
Can't
Mitchell.
see it.
Yeah,
I
can't see it. I think Quinn and Mitchell starts. And you took Cooper DeJean in the second round, and you traded up to get him. They wanted him. They loved him. You heard Jeffrey Lurie on there and Howie Roseman talking about they were obsessed with getting him. Howie couldn't sleep. There's no way in my mind that he doesn't have a role in this defense. And the easiest path right now, in my opinion, is nickel quarterback, because you already have CJ at safety. You have Reed Blankenship. You'll have Sidney Brown. I think Cooper's a nickel, and he's a really good player at nickel. I'm not saying he is this player, but we've seen what Trent McDuffie means to the Chiefs as their slot corner. I'm not saying he's going to be that level of player, but it could be a guy who's one of the top nickels in football, and I think he takes over pretty fast.
Good stuff, Cayden Steele. Thanks so much for joining the show. Make sure everybody reads Cayden Steele's work at nj.com and follows Cayden on Twitter. Cayden, thanks for joining the show, man.
Thank you.
There's Cayden Steele from NJ.com. Great stuff. Great talking to Cayden. Really, really knowledgeable about the team. So pretty good stuff there. Johnny Mac, it's been a defensive 2 days to start the week. We got to talk some offense tomorrow.
Got to get back to the headline, the sexy stuff, the offense. Yeah.
Well, look, the NFL is dictating that we should talk about offense, right?
Yeah. I mean, everything in this league is built around the offense and trying to get more scoring and get points up, and people are excited by it. And this is one of the top offenses in football talent wise, but that doesn't mean there isn't question marks. We got into a few of them. We'll get into them a little bit more tomorrow, but I've said it pretty consistently. To me, the most interesting story about this team this year will be how Nick Sirianni and Kellen Moore mesh together, or if they mesh together. It's going to be the top story of the year.
We'll come back and we'll wrap up this Tuesday edition of Birds 365. I got one question for Johnny Mac before we get out of here today, and it has to do with the pressure on the offense. Somebody in the chat told me clearly Hurts, and I disagree in a big way, and I'll tell you why after the break when we close up this Tuesday edition of Birds 365. Make sure everybody likes the show. Just almost out of time here on Tuesday, so we'll have a quick follow-up with Johnny Mac on that. Make sure you like the show. Stay tuned for my final question to Johnny Mac on this Tuesday edition of Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.